Can talks in Kazakhstan be a turning point to end the war in Syria? Russia's throwing its weight behind a political solution, but there's no face-to-face meeting between the Syrian government and opposition. So can the deep divisions be bridged? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Sika. World leaders have often said the fate of Syria lies with its people. Yet foreign powers have fueled and funded the war in Syria and are now again leading the talks to end it. Russia, Turkey and Iran have organized negotiations in Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. It's very different from the regular venue of Geneva, and it's an unusual combination of power brokers compared to the UN and the US. So are their chances of success better or worse? We'll get to our guests in just a moment. But first, Stephanie Decker reports on what Syrians think of the ongoing talks.
The fall of Aleppo has been a turning point in this conflict, both for the opposition and also on a diplomatic level. Turkey has shifted closer to Russia, and the talks in Astana are largely a result of that change. Now, we've been speaking to Syrians who supported the uprising in 2011. What do they think now? We'll start in Al-Tareb, which is in the western countryside of Aleppo.
The problem with the Astana talks is that our opinions don't matter. It's a Turkish-Russian deal. They will decide what happens between us and the regime.
The revolution has been sold to many different backers because of dollars. If there were unity among us, we would not be facing this situation.
That is a common sentiment among many people we speak to. 6 years into this war, there are many different factions and infighting has become a real problem.
We are against the fact that there are so many different factions. Our enemy fights us as one body, but we are fighting each other because of this dirty external support by foreign countries.
I don't know much about the details of the Astana talks, but the truce is a good thing for us, especially after losing Aleppo, so we can organize our defense lines.
Further south and just east of Damascus is the area of Eastern Ghouta. It's the main rebel presence around the capital. Let's find out what people think in the largest city, Douma.
Astana is a big game, an international game, and we hope that the Syrian people will not have to pay the consequences.
We hope that these talks have some benefits for the Syrian revolution, not like Geneva 1 or 2 where nothing happened.
But there isn't much hope that the talks in Astana will lead to any real change on the ground. They are seen as a stepping stone to meetings in Geneva set for a couple of weeks from now. And these negotiations have always proven extremely complicated in the past.
The meeting in Astana is meant to pave the way to peace, but many questions remain over what can be achieved. Now, the venue of the talks is symbolic. Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union and has long-running ties with Russia. The future of President Bashar al-Assad is central to resolving the Syrian conflict, but his fate won't be addressed this week. Negotiations will focus on securing the ceasefire agreed last month. Representatives from the Syrian government and opposition are attending the talks, but the rebels are refusing to speak face-to-face. It's also important to note who isn't at the talks, notably ISIL and Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, formerly known as al-Nusra Front. They are some of the main armed groups which maintain control of Syria's oil fields. A resolution without them could be difficult to implement. Well, let's bring in our guests now. Joining me here in the studio is Marwan Kabalan, Syrian analyst and head of policy analysis at the Arab Center at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. From Moscow, we have Pavel Felgenhauer, a Russian military and defense analyst, and joining us from Beirut, Mohanad Hage Ali. He is director of communications at the Carnegie Middle East Center. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. So, Marwan, let me start with you. It's been made very clear that the goal of these talks are very modest at this point. They're largely seeking to build on the ceasefire deal that was reached in late December. What's your assessment, broadly speaking, of these talks and what they might lead to long term?
Well, I think originally the main objective of these talks was, in fact, to secure, the ceasefire, which was signed by both the Syrian regime and the opposition in Ankara on the 29th of December. But I think the Russians and Turks may have been also trying to start some sort of a political process between the two sides. But I think the opposition was adamant on that they won't be able to talk about any political solution at this stage. They are mainly concerned about securing the ceasefire, about releasing the war prisoners from regime jails, and also about having or granting access to humanitarian aid to besieged areas. And I think the armed opposition, which is now leading the process on behalf of the opposition, was very much concerned not to give the impression that they are actually into this process of sidelining the political opposition. I'm talking here about the High Negotiation Commission, which was not actually invited to Moscow, to these talks. So I think
this is another Syrian opposition.
This is the political. This is the political umbrella of the Syrian opposition, because at this stage the Russians and the Turks, they decided that only the armed opposition will be attending alongside the regime. But since the regime actually has sent a political delegation rather than a military delegation, so we were, as analysts, thinking that maybe the Russian and the Turks are trying to push into starting a political process, rather not only securing the ceasefire. This is something the opposition has refused over the past couple of days.
Pavel Felgenhauer, what is Russia hoping to get out of these talks? As we said, they're taking place in Astana, which is in kind of Russia's sphere of influence, and they are seen as a major power broker in this. But this is not a conflict that they want to drag on, is it?
Well, Russia basically wants to keep its foothold in Syria and possibly expand that to other parts of the Middle East. To achieve that, it's very important for Russia to expand its base of support, not to be seen as only supporting Shias and Alawites, but also to build bridges to Sunnis, including Sunni armed groups in Syria. And that's more or less what this talks in Astana should more or less kick off. No one expected that there's going to be any kind of political breakthrough. The delegations that came there could not actually achieve that, even if they very much wanted to. But Russia wants to speak directly to some parts of the Syrian armed opposition to try to recruit them and turn them around and form, so that they will kind of first sign up to a ceasefire, then to a neutral position, and then maybe, together with Russian support, would go against other radical parts of the jihadist opposition.
Mohanad, Hage, Ali, what do you expect to come out of these talks? And do you think what's happened in Aleppo with the regime regaining most of that city, has that created a breakthrough this time?
Yes, indeed. The Aleppo breakthrough, as the takeover of eastern Aleppo by the regime forces, is basically the basis for all of these negotiations that are going on over there. They want to entrench the truce, which didn't really hold much in the past. They want to consolidate the regime's gains in these areas, and Russia's advance, or Russia's sphere of influence advance in the region is seen in this through working with Turkey and Iran on both ends of the negotiations. And this is something that we've seen in their statement. They basically said that we are going to ask the Iranians to pressure the regime, and we are going to ask the Turks to pressure the opposition. So in a sense, they're trying to play this maestro role, although they are involved in the conflict in a very sort of clear way. Basically, they are leading the conflict in that part. Yeah, so I don't think there will be any political settlement. That's definite. There will be a truce, but at the same time, what we will see underground is more tensions in between the Syrian opposition. And that's something that we've seen in the past few days. Just as Astana's negotiations were being prepared, we've seen some tensions between Ahrar al-Sham on one hand and other militant groups with Fath al-Sham, which is basically the former Jabhat al-Nusra group. So we will see some infighting on the opposition side, or on the regime side we will see some sort of peace and stability, you know, under the Russian sort of protection.
Yeah, but this is nonetheless, in my opinion, this is the most serious effort at ending the Syrian crisis so far, in my opinion. Why? Because there are a few reasons here. Maybe you mentioned some of them at the very beginning. First of all, we don't have this arms twist between the US and Russia. It's no longer there, in my opinion. That was the main feature of the relationship between the two superpowers under the Obama administration. So we don't have the United States here. Second, we are having the two powers, the three major powers who are having boots on the ground, i.e. Russia, Turkey, and Iran. These are the three major powers in the Syrian conflict right now. And they seem to have agreed now, at least I'm talking about Turkey and Russia. I don't know much about Iran. But I think Turkey and Russia, as Mohanad has said, the two countries actually seem to me very much keen on bringing this conflict to an end because it's no longer serving their own interests. For Turkey, Syria has become a source of threat to its national security and to its even unity by having ISIL bombing every day, almost on a daily basis inside Turkey, and also we have the Kurdish, the PKK trying actually to establish an independent entity in the northern border of Syria. The Russians, on the other hand, in my opinion, they have reached the limits. I mean, Aleppo is the biggest city that they could actually take in this war, and I don't see any other major objective for the Russian actually to continue this war for. So this is why they have decided at this stage to stop acting as the major war machine in this country, and maybe start acting as a peacemaker rather than a warmonger. Iran is trying right now, in my opinion, to join the fray. Today it was very important, in my opinion, noticing the Iranian behavior. Iran wanted very much to transform this bilateral business between Turkey and Russia, bilateral sponsorship between Turkey and Russia of the talks, into becoming a trilateral one by including itself into this. It wants very much to present itself as part of the solution because it seemed very much as part of the problem, at least from the side of the Syrian opposition. So in all, I think these three major powers are trying to do something now, and we are hoping that the Trump administration will be supporting this effort rather than actually trying to hinder it.
Yeah, well, let's put that then to Pavel. Do you see any areas of conflict there among the main powers who are involved in brokering these talks, Russia, Iran, and Turkey? And what about the Trump factor? Could the US under a new administration now be a help in all of this?
Well, Russia would want to most likely somewhat distance itself from Iran right now. There have been some constant problems between Moscow and Tehran, though of course solutions have been found. But Russia, as I say, does not want to be seen as the champion of the Shias in the Middle East. It wants to be seen as the champion of stability and equal support from Sunnis and Shias. So for Russia right now, kind of spreading out, moving also in the direction of Turkey, bringing in Egypt, if possible, other Sunni nations into the equation, possibly Gulf states too, is strategically very important for a long-term Russian strategic presence, if not even dominance, in the entire region, not just keeping a couple of bases in Syria, though of course that is also very important. The Trump administration would come in also handy. Again, Putin's idea that he expressed in the UN in September 15, forming a kind of anti-Daesh coalition, anti-terrorist coalition, like an anti-Hitler coalition, he said. That would be a kind of a good slogan to bring in everyone on board. because everyone is, of course, opposed to Daesh, more or less. And that would also mean that not only Turkey would be putting pressure on parts of the Syrian opposition to find a quid pro quo, including a possible battlefield alliance with Russia, but also the Americans would putting some pressure on those parts of the opposition that they talk to work together with Russia. So yes, from Russian point of view, America has a very important, the new American administration has a very important role to play.
Mohanad, Hage Ali, your response to that?
I think this is unbelievable. I mean, the Russian Air Force is bombarding Sunni areas, is leading the way for Shia militias, for the Syrian regime, which is bluntly sectarian at certain points, and it still wants the Sunnis to see it in different eyes. I just don't, I don't see how that's possible. They need also to input how they see things. I mean, they are being bombarded on the other side. They will definitely see the Russians as the perpetrators of this massive destruction in eastern Aleppo and elsewhere. And that's the only way we will see things. Of course, the Trump administration will come in handy. The Trump administration will support the Russian effort in Syria and in Iraq while putting some sanctions on Iran. That is the small nuance that we will see in the region. The Trump administration will put more sanctions on Iran, to isolate it, to put certain controls and limits on its economy, but at the same time it will support the Iranian influence and Iranian effort, which goes hand in hand with the Russian intervention in Syria, and at the same time to support the Iranian effort in supporting the Iraqi government in pushing towards these areas where ISIS is in control, and at the same time by excluding the Sunnis from the Iraqi political sphere. And this is something which is detrimental to what's going on in terms of the growth of ISIS and the growth of radical Islam in that part of the world. So we will see that, and we will also see the Trump administration pushing for more radical pro-Israeli policies in Palestine. So I think what we will see, the people of the region are hamburgered on one hand between this radical policy, which we are seeing, and it's dangerous on the Palestinian issue, and at the same time we are seeing a support of the Russian effort in Syria and also the Iranian policy in Iraq. Well, this is something which will lead to more radicalization of the populations. That's what it will lead to.
We've talked quite a lot up to this point about the various outside powers and what sort of a difference, if any, they can make in resolving this conflict. But this is one that's ultimately going to be going to have to be resolved by Syrians themselves, isn't it, Marwan? And if the two sides can't agree on even meeting face to face, what are the prospects for that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm afraid I cannot agree with that, because this war is by definition a war by proxy, in which the outside powers, major powers, Russia, Iran, Turkey, the United States, the Gulf states actually are supporting local proxies. I mean, this has been the case for the past 4 or 5 years, in fact, in Syria. And my hunch is that we're not going to have an agreement in Syria unless we have an agreement between the outside powers. We need to have agreement between Turkey. This is why I was very much, in fact, in favor of this rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, because when you have these great powers actually fighting, or regional powers fighting each other on Syrian soil by Syrian blood, actually, you can see, I mean, the situation in Syria like this: destruction, half of the population displaced, the entire country was turned actually into rubble. So now when we have these different powers coming into terms to agree that maybe it's enough fighting in Syria, maybe it's enough actually fighting with Syrian blood, I mean, that's a very good sign in my opinion. So let's have them agree first on how actually they are going to set the stage for a solution in Syria, because today and yesterday actually the major talks actually were between Russia, Iran and Turkey for the the communique of the Astana communique, and then they presented it, I mean, to the two Syrian factions, the regime and the opposition, which means, in fact, that this is, as I said at the very beginning, this is a war by proxy in which the Syrians, they have very little say in the conflict which is taking place on their land, on their soil.
Mohanad Hage Ali, I want to ask you the fact that the jihadi, so-called jihadi groups like Jabhat Fatah Hisham are not included in these talks, and ISIL, of course. But the reality is, and even in the case of ISIL, even though they've taken some big losses over the last few months, they still have a presence there. They are a long way from being a spent force. This is something that has to be dealt with one way or another, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so the case. I mean, I think in terms of also the truce that we are seeing discussed in the Astana region, of course, these are excluded, which means we will see some sort of conflict between these groups and at the same time the remaining Syrian opposition, military opposition groups, which are taking part in Astana today. So we will see some sort of conflict on the opposition side, but on the regime side, this won't be the case. The issue is, why haven't we seen in the Astana talks any mention of the refugee issue? For instance, now certain parts of eastern Aleppo have been freed according to the regime. How about discussing some framework with international observers, etc., of returning, you know, these massive numbers of people who have been displaced from their homes? Why haven't we seen this in Daraya, in different places of Syria in which we've had massive destruction? How about we start talking about the issues that matter? The truce won't matter where it should, basically on the opposition side. So if we see more infighting in places like Idlib, and we are seeing certain tensions now as a result of this Astana negotiations process. So on the regime side, there won't be any fighting, but you know, I don't think on the regime side they're suffering that much in terms of bombing, in terms of sieges. They're not really suffering. The people who are suffering now due to this conflict will suffer more after the Astana. And I think this is the most important and significant issue which is overlooked in all the discussion about this Astana negotiations process.
Well, let's put that then to Pavel Felgenhauer. Why hasn't the human toll of this war been considered in these negotiations? The millions displaced and number of people killed and so on. This is something that has to be addressed ultimately, isn't it?
Well, rebuilding Syria, of course, is a very serious matter. But that should involve a lot of money and foreign donors. And of course, Russia and Turkey and Iran cannot provide that amount of aid. That would mean that the Gulf states, the European Union, the United States, and other Western powers should kind of pool in and begin the rebuilding of Syria after the bad guys, the jihadists, are being defeated or pushed to the fringes, and then the rebuilding may begin. But that's not about what's going to be right now discussed in Astana. I believe that they're going to be, right now, just recently there was a kind of example what Russia would like to see happening was this joint Russia-Turkish air raids near Bab in support actually of Turkish forces and Free Syrian Army forces on the ground that are trying to take that city from ISIS. So that's what Russia would want to see happening on the military side. And then other parts, other more rich nations joining in to begin the process of rebuilding Syria and stabilizing Syria socially and then politically.
All right, that is going to have to be the last word. Thank you, Pavel Felgenhauer in Moscow, Mohanad Hage Ali in Beirut, and Marwan Kabalan joining me here in studio in Doha. Thanks very much for being with us. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.